Have you ever caught yourself saying, "Money isn't important to me," while opening your banking app for the 10th time that day? I'm talking about a specific kind of person, someone who, in the name of faith, has built a wall between God and money, and yet they wake every morning consumed by what they lack. This contradiction is one of the cruelest patterns I see when I study how people relate to prosperity. This isn't a casual thought. It's a precise map of a mind stuck on repeat. I'll show you the pattern you may be running without knowing it, how it steadily sabotages your life, and the first concrete move to begin breaking that mental prison. Can you listen to a truth about yourself for the next 5 minutes without switching off? If so, stay with me because what I'm about to diagnose will feel personal. And the next part will unpack who exactly lives inside this contradiction. When I describe this type of person, I begin with the image they like to project. They dress their poverty in virtue. They use phrases that sound noble. Material things don't matter to me. I'm focused on what's eternal. I choose a simple life. Those sentences serve a social function. They signal moral superiority. They shield shame. But the private life tells a different story. Behind closed doors, they refresh accounts, hide bills, and avoid phone calls from the bank. They rehearse excuses. They postpone tax forms. They defer decisions that might change their financial trajectory. In public, they are spiritual. In private, they are in combat with scarcity. I want to dissect that dissonance. I want to show the layers of self-deception they cling to, because understanding those layers is the only honest path out. At the surface, their identity is simple. They are spiritual people. That label does heavy lifting. It grants them permission to ignore the financial side of life. It protects them from scrutiny. It lets them explain away anxiety as righteousness. I'd rather be poor and pure than rich and corrupt, they say, as if poverty were moral proof. But look closer. The identity is made of stories. Stories about merit. Stories about sacrifice. Stories about being deliberately immune to the seductions of comfort. Those stories are performative. They feel noble when told in the right company. They sound like a shield against envy. Yet stories are not neutral. They shape attention. They steer decisions. They organize what a person notices and what they ignore. When your internal story values scarcity as spiritual currency, every increase in wealth will come with suspicion. And suspicion kills possibility. Now watch what happens when money appears in their life. A small bonus. A friend offers paid work. A relative lends a sum. A rare opportunity for training shows up. Their first move is not to calculate value. It is to test moral alignment. Is this too material? Will this make me less holy? Will people think I sold out? The moral calculus often trumps practical evaluation. The opportunity is judged by a spiritual yardstick. So they defer. They give half effort. They underprice. They say no with a trembling smile. Then the opportunity yields less than it could have. Or it goes to someone else. They return to a comfortable narrative. See? Money changes people. I did the right thing. The cost is real. Months of potential growth slip away. The proof of their narrative is manufactured by their own avoidance. That is the core contradiction. They preach detachment and then act from fear, not from peace. Let me pull the curtain back on thought patterns. When they think about money, a quiet script runs in the background. It is usually a compound of 4 lines. Line 1, money tempts or corrupts. Line 2, needing money equals moral failure. Line 3, I am not meant to pursue wealth. Line 4, if I try, something bad will happen. These lines are shorthand for deeper wiring, shame, ancestral messages, fear of judgment, and a desire to belong to an imagined higher moral order. They are not rational arguments. They are emotional habits. They run fast and loud under the conscious mind. And because emotions drive behavior, the person behaves as if the lines were true. They avoid the very actions that would alter their finances. I see this in the language they use. Their vocabulary around money is defensive. Not for me. I can't afford it. It's not my path. I prefer to live simply. Those phrases function as rituals. They are repeated like prayers that confirm an identity. But rituals can become prisons. Repeating them daily strengthens neural pathways that favor scarcity. If your language around money is scarce, your mind rehearses scarcity. Your body learns to contract. Your choices reflect that contraction. You think it's spiritual humility. In reality, it's a habituated survival stance. Let's zoom into everyday scenes. I will narrate a morning with one of these people. You can see the small, repeated acts that create the big pattern. They wake and pray or meditate. They set an intention about love, service, or detachment. The words are sincere. They mean them. Then they check their phone. The bank app shows low balance. Their body tenses. A sense of failure rises like bile. They promise themselves to be patient, to trust the universe. They tell a story about timing and destiny. At breakfast, a text arrives, a paid project invitation. Their chest tightens. They think of how taking the project might change how others see them. They imagine people whispering, "sold out." They reply slowly. They undervalue their offer. They delay negotiation. They accept terms that do not honor their worth. Late that week, they berate themselves for being a poor negotiator. They say, "It wasn't meant to be." The narrative reasserts itself. This loop is subtle. It looks like virtue. It feels like integrity. But it costs momentum. Momentum is the currency of growth. I want to be blunt about comparison and envy. That emotion is a silent engine under this whole pattern. They often resent others who seem to blend faith and wealth. They cannot stand the idea of someone who prays and also lives comfortably. So they watch people like that with an odd mix of contempt and longing. Contempt saves face. Longing makes them human. They tell themselves stories about how those people lost something essential. They craft counter-narratives that justify their own suffering. Yet, at night, those same people scroll social media and feel the sting of "why not me?" The sting is a quiet teacher. The brain records contradictions, public virtue, private hunger. The soul senses incongruence. That dissonance becomes stress. Now, let's name the invisible bargain they made. They traded responsibility for moral identity. They chose to be seen as above material concerns rather than to be skilled at managing them. It is a choice that often starts in childhood. A parent scolds a child for wanting things. A family praises austerity as moral strength. Those early messages fossilize into rules. Good people do without. Asking for money is selfish. We don't aim to be rich. The child grows into a person who believes virtue is proven by lack. The adult keeps the rule even when it harms them. Rules become religion. Religion becomes self-punishment. I tell people this without flinching because compassion without truth is only comfort. If you are wrapped in that identity, you need two things: compassion for the history that formed you, and a brutal map of how that history plays out now. Compassion helps you stop shaming yourself. The map helps you stop repeating the same moves. Both are necessary. One without the other is delusion. Here, midway through this section, I want to make a small ask. If you find this analysis useful, please consider subscribing. I'm building this channel and aiming for the first 1,000 subscribers. Your subscription helps more honest conversations reach more people. Also, leave your city and country in the comments. I read them and they help me understand who is watching. Thank you. Back to the work. The request is a pause, not the point. The point is your pattern. Let me paint a few specific examples. Concrete scenes force recognition faster than abstract description. First, the missed course. A woman I know was invited to a weekend retreat on financial literacy. She loved the spiritual teacher who recommended it. She told herself, "True faith will carry me. I don't need another course." She believed scarcity was noble. She made an excuse and didn't sign up. 6 months later, a friend who did the course was running a small business with enough profit to stop freelancing. My friend felt puzzled. She told herself, "At least I didn't compromise." The real cost? 2 years of slower income and mounting resentment. Second, the impulsive donation. A man receives unexpected freelance. Now, I want to talk about the cognitive dissonance in more technical terms, but in plain language. When you hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously, money isn't spiritual, and I am worried about money. Your mind resolves the tension by letting feeling lead judgment. The feeling that repeats most wins. So if worry repeats more than trust, your life will reflect worry. If shame repeats more than gratitude, your world will conform to shame. It's uncomfortable. It feels unfair, but it is consistent. The universe, as I explain it, is not punishing you. It is mirroring your dominant internal atmosphere. That mirroring shows up as evidence. You interpret missed opportunities as proof that money isn't for you. You interpret a small failure as a sign of moral correctness. You see the pattern and name it destiny or test. Human beings are excellent at finding evidence that supports their story. We are lousy at seeing the evidence that contradicts it. That selective seeing is the engine here. What about control and competence? Many in this group avoid learning practical finance. They call it not my calling. But competence reduces anxiety. Learning budgets, taxes, or basic investment principles is not inherently secular. It is a tool. A carpenter learns tools. A parent learns childcare. A spiritually oriented person can learn financial tools and use them in service of a higher purpose. Yet they resist. The resistance looks noble. In reality, it's fear. Fear of responsibility. Fear of having to admit they were wrong. I often challenge viewers with a first-person line you can try mentally. I am spiritual and competent with money. Say it slowly. Let it land. It feels odd because it contradicts your training. Repeat it. It will not change your bank balance overnight, but it starts to change which thoughts you permit. Changing permitted thoughts changes choices. Choices change life. Let me address identity politics inside the tribe. Saying money matters can cause social friction. People fear being ostracized by their spiritual community. They imagine being accused of greed if they pursue abundance. So they hide, or they adopt martyrdom as a social badge. Martyrdom has social value. It shows commitment. Yet martyrdom also isolates. It makes practical cooperation awkward. People avoid discussing money. Collective silence becomes systemic ignorance. That silence is lethal over decades. This pattern produces relational damage too. Money shapes relationships. Avoiding transparent financial conversation creates resentment and power imbalances. I see couples where one partner quietly courts prosperity and the other declares poverty a moral stance. They live on separate planes. The result is distance, secrecy, blame. Children inherit confusion. That is a multi-generational harm disguised as virtue. At the end of the day, the contradiction is not only cognitive. It is emotional, behavioral, and social. It is a whole ecosystem that sustains scarcity. To dismantle it, one must map the ecosystem. You must notice the micro-decisions that keep the pattern alive. You must tell a truer story about what it means to be spiritual. You must learn to steward resources as part of your service, not in spite of it. In the next section, I will detail the distinct personalities inside this tribe, how fear dresses itself differently. Each subtype has its own rituals and escape routes. Recognizing which of them you are is the first step toward targeted change. If you want to stop repeating the same scenes, you need to see which script you act from. I will name them and show how they play out in daily life. There are variations on the theme. The core wound is shared, but the masks differ. I generally see for clear subtypes. Each one tells the same story in a different voice. I will describe them as if I were reading a case file. I do this because naming reduces shame and sharpens aim. If you hear yourself, do not panic. Identification is the first tool of change. First, the spiritual purist. They are the most self-righteous in public. Their sentences are clean and unambiguous. I live simply by choice, they say with calm conviction. Their house might be modest by design. They value inner life highly. Their belief is almost doctrinal. Wealth equals contamination. For them, Poverty is proof of devotion. A typical day for the purist starts with prayer and refusal. They decline invitations that could bring money because the events feel too commercial. They volunteer, teach, and give away knowledge. They avoid paid opportunities because those feel like dancing with compromise. If money does come, they redistribute it quickly, sometimes recklessly, because keeping it feels like hypocrisy. At night, though, the purist resents unseen comforts others possess. They nurse a private ache for what they publicly reject. The belief root for the purist is simple. Moral worth is inversely proportional to material possession. The logic is perverse but coherent. If this person admits they want comfort, their identity crumbles. So they double down. The consequence is gradual deprivation. They build a moral cathedral out of austerity and find themselves lonely in its echoing halls. Their relationships strain under unspoken resentments. Their gifts shrink in scale because they refuse to fund their capacity. Second, the hereditary guilty. This type carries family narratives like heirlooms. Money is for bad people, a parent might have said. The child internalizes that message and grows into a person who feels unworthy by lineage. Their psychology is threaded with shame and inherited injunction to be small. A day for the hereditary guilty is punctuated by self-sabotage disguised as cautiousness. They avoid promotion opportunities because they imagine they will be exposed as fraud. They pass up sales conversations for fear of being seen as mercenary. They might have a savings account, but are terrified to invest or diversify. Their internal monologue sounds like a courtroom. I don't deserve this. They look for confirmation and find it. Every setback is proof of unworthiness. The root story is, I am genetically or culturally disallowed from abundance. Consequences are chronic under-earning, missed investments, and a persistent sense of living beneath potential. They often end up relying on crisis assistance or borrowing, which reinforces the family myth. The life of the hereditary guilty becomes a slow, polite attrition. Third, the financial martyr. This one performs scarcity as social currency. They narrate their suffering to gain sympathy or moral authority. I've made so many sacrifices, they say, and the audience nods. Martyrdom becomes identity and social capital. The martyr confuses suffering for meaning and uses it to gain attention and to avoid change. A martyr's day includes broadcasting hardships. They tell stories about what they gave up. They may refuse help because accepting it would shrink their narrative. When opportunities to change arise, they decline because growth would end their story arc concretely. A martyr might sabotage a business by undercharging and then publicly lament the result. The emotional economy rewards their role. Friends admire the sacrifice while money problems persist. The belief root is, my worth is proven by suffering. The consequence is an elegant tragedy. Relationships skew towards caretakers and enablers. The martyr is valued for their pain, not for their potential. They rarely build wealth because wealth would dissolve the interpersonal dynamics that sustain their identity. Fourth, the spiritually disconnected idealist. This subtype believes in abundance as a cosmic promise, but lives waiting for the universe to act without taking the necessary earthly steps. They speak in affirmations about prosperity. They read about law of attraction ideas and nod in agreement. Yet they do not align action with belief. Their day shows inconsistency. They make grand statements about trust. They avoid budgets. They ignore contracts. They wait for signs instead of doing the due diligence that would create security. When a chance to learn or to plan appears, they rationalize avoidance as faith. The universe will handle it, they whisper. Months pass. Bills accumulate. The incongruence breeds anxiety. The belief root here is faith absolves me of stewardship. The result is a fragile optimism that collapses under practical pressure. They either experience transient windfalls that are mismanaged, or they go long stretches of passive waiting that erode self-efficacy. Now, none of these subtypes exists in purity. I see mixtures. A person may be a hereditary guilty who sometimes performs martyrdom, but small competence bred confidence. She slowly raised her rates, created reserves, and negotiated better contracts. The real shift was not the money. It was the internal permission to be both spiritual and competent. Today she still meditates daily. She also tracks cash flow. Her life expanded, not shrank. Story 2. Jorge was a believer in the universe provides. He spoke about abundance at gatherings. He also ignored contracts and delayed paying taxes. A friend offered him a steady freelance contract with solid pay. Jorge turned it down because it would lock him in, and he wanted to remain open to signs. Years later, signs did not come. He experienced sporadic gigs and chronic stress. The wake-up call was a legal notice he could not ignore. He had to hire an accountant. Learning to handle the paperwork felt like learning a new language. He resented it at first. Then, to his surprise, he found that proper systems freed mental energy. He could be still and intentional while also being reliable in the world. His faith did not erode. It matured. He stopped waiting for cosmic handlers and became a participant. Both stories end with the same truth. Integration beats opposition. Spiritual conviction and material competence are not enemies. They are capacities that feed each other when regulated by honest intention. Now I'll outline practical behavioral fingerprints for each subtype. This is not punitive. It is diagnostic. If you can spot these in yourself, you have direction on what to change next. The purest fingerprints: frequent disclaimers about riches, immediate redistribution of unexpected funds, refusal of commercial opportunities, secret envy when others access comfort. Corrective step: begin with valuation. Practice asking, what would it look like to fund my gifts without compromising my integrity? Small experiment: price one service at market value and observe feelings. The hereditary guilty's fingerprints: self-sabotage in negotiations, fear of deservedness, avoidance of investment. Corrective step: debt and scarcity mapping. Write your financial lineage narrative. Name inherited messages. Replace one harmful narrative with a factual counterstatement. Practice keeping a small emergency fund. The martyr's fingerprints: stories of sacrifice that center identity, performative scarcity, rejection of help. Corrective step: practice gratitude without suffering as a badge. Experiment with receiving. Allow one person to pay for a meal and notice the internal commentary. Begin to separate dignity from distress. The disconnected idealist's fingerprints: talk of faith without matching action, avoidance of accountability, chaotic cash flow. Corrective step: marry faith to structure. Build one small system weekly budget, a payment schedule, and commit to it for 3 months. Each corrective step is a practical experiment, not an identity betrayal. It's a localized test. Try it and observe how the internal story responds. The task is to produce evidence that contradicts the old script. Evidence rewrites belief faster than argument. I will give you one exercise you can do right now. It's short and in first-person language. Repeat it aloud or write it down. I am spiritual and I steward my resources. Say it 3 times, slowly. Then list one small action you will take this week that aligns with stewardship. Something concrete. Check one bill, schedule one meeting to discuss rates, open a spreadsheet. Keep it visible. The point is to train new muscle. Before I close this section, notice one social reality. If you begin to change, some people will resist. Your tribe may accuse you of abandoning purity. Expect it. Resistance is a sign of growth. It does not mean you are wrong. It means you are moving the boundary. Prepare for the social negotiation. Be gentle but firm. In the next part, I will explain the invisible law that binds all these subtypes. I will not abstract away from practice. I will describe the exact mechanism by which thought, feeling, and repeated behavior translate into the financial life you experience. Understanding that law is the lever. If you want to end the cycle, you need that lever. I want to take the subtypes I just described and show you the machine that runs them. I call it the law of dissonance manifested. Say that name once. Let it sit. It sounds technical because it is a mechanism, not a sermon. It is a simple mechanical truth about how thought, feeling, and repeated action translate into the realities you call luck or fate. The name points to a single fact. You can say one thing and live as if you mean another. You can preach detachment and panic at a bank balance. You can bless poverty and hoard receipts. The universe or reality, or simply the patterning of consequences, does not answer to your declarations. It answers to your dominant, repeated interior energy. That is the law. Here is how it works, step by step. A stimulus arrives. A bill, an invite, a raise, a chance to learn. You interpret that stimulus through a story. That story is short and usually old. Money corrupts. Wanting is weak. I am not worthy. The story triggers an emotion. Often the emotion is tightness, shame, anxiety, righteous contempt. Emotion fuels behavior. If you are anxious, you avoid, delay, underprice, or spend impulsively to soothe discomfort. If you are contemptuous, you decline, judge, or sabotage with moral certainty. The consequence is predictable: lost opportunity, poor negotiation, or a false proof of your original story. The loop closes. You call it evidence. The loop runs another round. Think of the pattern as a conveyor belt. Story at the top, emotion in the middle, action as the output. Evidence returns to the top as raw material for the next story. The belt is invisible because it runs below conscious awareness. It is steady because repetition builds habit. It is ruthless because it only cares about consistency. The universe reflects the pattern because your behavior organizes the world around you to match the energy you repeatedly send. Let me give you a concrete scene. You get a message. A friend offers paid consulting. Your mind immediately flips a switch. You check whether taking money will make you less spiritual. You replay a memory of a parent saying, "Good people don't chase money." Your chest tightens. You undercut your price. You accept work with terms that make it impossible to scale. 3 months later, you are exhausted and resentful. You tell yourself the opportunity wasn't right for your path. The proof arrives. The friend who charged properly now has a full calendar. The cycle gains another tooth. Now a different scene. You receive an unexpected freelance payout. Instead of thinking, "Where can I invest this to create stability?" you think, "I must give this away." You do so immediately. The act is noble. It is also a ritual that quiets guilt. You avoid the necessary discomfort of stewarding resources. Months later, you are short on rent. The absence of a reserve becomes confirmation. Money doesn't stick. A new worryful story forms. The conveyor belt accelerates. You will notice the law has no moral judgment. It does not reward purity or punish piety. It only mirrors what you repeatedly enact. That is why spiritual vocabulary and spiritual acts can coexist with financial dysfunction. Saying God will provide does not change the wiring. Only repeated, coherent inner alignment between belief, feeling, and action will. If your belief says one thing and your behavior says another, behavior will win. Always. Behavior is the muscle the universe reads. There is another feature worth isolating. The law operates by attention. What you watch grows. If your mental theater is mostly playing the scarcity scene, your attention trains your perception to find examples. You become an expert at spotting scarcity. You notice the one unpaid invoice and miss the steady client who pays on time. You catalog evidence that confirms your rule. The universe does not conspire to punish you. You become an excellent selector for scarcity. The selection effect explains why evidence feels convincing. Human cognition loves narrative coherence. We are wired to collect data that supports our stories. The law exploits that. Every time you interpret a small setback as proof of a deep moral truth, "I failed because I would be corrupted," or "I can't have money because people like me do not deserve it," you are feeding the machine. The belt gets faster and the results more predictable. I want to translate this into the vocabulary of the tribe. For the purist, the law turns every financial changing what you do in consistent, repeatable ways, rewires the selection effect. New actions produce new data. New data creates new stories. New stories produce new emotion. New emotion stabilizes new behavior. That is the lever. So how do you work this law rather than be worked by it? You begin by mapping the conveyor belt in your own life. Pick one recurring financial event. Follow it backward. What did you think first? What old story lit? What feeling arose in the body? What exactly did you do? Where did the evidence show up? Describe the loop on paper. The act of mapping externalizes the invisible belt. It exposes patterns. It makes a future change deliberate. You then design a tiny behavioral experiment that breaks one link in the chain. If your reflex is to give away windfalls, the experiment is to put 30% into a reserve before you feel the urge to donate. If your reflex is to underprice, the experiment is to set one price at market value and refuse to negotiate below it for 3 months. If your reflex is to avoid learning, the experiment is to open one book or schedule 1 hour with a tax advisor. Tiny, repeatable action for weeks. The reason small experiments work is not mere psychology. The law rewards consistency. The universe, through people, through opportunities, through consequences, aligns with consistent signals. A habit repeated is a message amplified. If that habit signals competence and openness, the world will produce different responses. If that habit signals scarcity and avoidance, the world will oblige. I also have to be honest about the social cost of changing the belt. When you start to act coherently, your tribe will notice. You will become a kind of anomaly. Some relationships will shift. That is both inevitable and necessary. The law does not care about your popularity. It cares about your alignment. Expect friction. Expect to lose some social applause. Expect to gain inner steadiness. Before I close this section, repeat this aloud. My actions speak louder than my explanations. Say it twice. Let it land as a concrete discipline. Because understanding the law is not mercy. It is responsibility. If you want different results, you must send different signals. The conveyor belt will stop if you stop feeding it the same story. The next part will show exactly how that conveyor belt looks when it runs the cycle of auto-sabotage in living color and how ordinary scenes become traps. Listen closely. You will see yourself in them. The law I just described is dry until you see it in motion. So let me take you inside the loop. I will show the cycle of auto-sabotage as a repeated 3-act play. Each act looks small. Each round finishes with the same hard outcome. The tragedy is in the repetition, not the first mistake. Act 1 is the trigger. An opportunity appears. It is a client, a course, a bonus, a chance to price correctly. The trigger is ordinary. You would not write it into a drama. That is why it is so dangerous. Act 2 is the interpretation and feeling. The trigger is not neutral. You narrate it instantly. You interpret a raise as temptation. You interpret a course as too worldly. You interpret a contract as binding my spirit. The interpretation summons an emotion: guilt, fear, righteous disgust. That feeling is hot, immediate, and convincing. Act 3 is the behavior. You act to resolve the feeling. You decline, delay, underprice, or give away the money to soothe your moral discomfort. The outcome arrives. The opportunity dwindles, the deal gets compromised, or you feel temporarily righteous. Finally, you collect what your mind calls proof. You tell yourself, I was right. Money would have ruined me. The loop finishes and restarts, a little tighter than before. I want to walk through 3 scenes so you can recognize the mechanics, not just the morality. Scene 1. A woman, let's call her Lena, is invited to teach a paid workshop. She loves teaching. She also fears appearing mercenary. Her inner soundtrack says, if I charge, I will be seen as greedy. The feeling that lands is shame. She halves her normal fee to avoid judgment. The class fills with people who value it less. The workshop feels brittle. Lena leaves thinking, people don't respect spiritual teachers who charge. The result confirms her story. Next invite, same script. Scene 2. A man named Daniel gets an unexpected freelance payment. He immediately recalls images of suffering he saw as a child. He spends most of it on donations to soothe old guilt. He feels noble in the moment and relieved. Months later, a repair bill appears. He borrows and repeats the shame cycle. The proof becomes, money never sticks with me. Daniel now interprets windfalls as a test to prove his moral worth, not as a chance for stability. Scene 3. Maya is an idealist who believes abundance is her birthright. She posts affirmations and buys a course about manifestation. She does not open the course. She waits for signs. Months pass. Bills accumulate. When a steady contract is offered, she turns it down because it would lock her in. Later, when work dries up, she says, I was waiting for the right timing. The timing never arrives because she never built the scaffold that would create it. You may recognize yourself in 1, 2, or all 3. That is normal. The loop is not a flaw so much as a trained reflex. It feels moral. It looks like integrity. But integrity without competence is self-harm masked as virtue. Now pay attention to how the cycle reinforces itself psychologically. After each loop completes, your brain files the experience as data. It does not file nuance. It files a short story. Charging means losing soul, or giving means being good. That story becomes a heuristic. Heuristics are economical for the mind. They save energy, but they do not care about truth. They care about survival. So the next time you face an opportunity, the heuristic fires faster. The loop accelerates. There is another hidden mechanic, social signaling. Public declarations of poverty or detachment function like codes. They attract validation. People praise sacrifice. That social reinforcement is addictive. It keeps the person performing scarcity even when they secretly resent the result. The applause for martyrdom creates a social economy in which suffering pays, emotionally, even while it bankrupts you practically. This is why logic alone fails. If you tell someone in this loop that it would be smart to save, they will nod and say, yes, of course. But then they will act from feeling. The feeling is the lever. To alter the loop, you must create new emotional experiences tied to different actions. How do you do that? There are practical moves. I will give you a progression that interrupts the chain. Step 1. Notice the trigger and label the first thought. Not later. In the moment. You must name the narrative as it emerges. I'm thinking charging will make me corrupt. Naming creates distance. Distance weakens the automaticity of the emotion. Step 2. Choose a micro-action that contradicts the story but is small enough to be tolerated by your nervous system. If your default is to underprice, your micro-action is to quote one market-appropriate fee for 1 month. If your default is to donate windfalls immediately, your micro-action is to put 30% into an emergency fund before choosing where the rest goes. The key is repeatability. Do it until the new action produces a different feeling. Step 3. Create a quick ritual that rewards the new action emotionally. If you price properly, allow yourself a 5-minute celebration ritual that is not spending a walk, a gratitude note, a short breath practice. This ritual trains your limbic system to associate competence with positive feeling. Step 4. Collect the data. Track the consequences concretely. Did the fee lead to better clients? Did the reserve prevent panic? Write the outcomes down. Evidence is the antidote to story. You are building a new catalog. Step 5. Narrate a new story aloud. Replace "money corrupts me" with "I steward resources to serve." Repeat it. Let the repetition rewire the heuristic. Words matter, but only when backed by consistent action. Let me pause and be blunt. None of this is fast. Neural pathways are built by repetition. The old loop was trained for years, sometimes generations. You are asking the system to relearn. It will resist. You will feel like an imposter. That feeling is expected. Lean into it anyway. There is also a subtle time dimension. Early rounds of the new action produce small, often invisible returns. In the next part 1 will describe the moment when this loop collapses into a crisis or shifts into awakening. That tipping point is brutal for some and liberating for others. I will show you the anatomy of the break and the 2 stark routes that follow. If you are running the loop now, what happens next will define the decade ahead. You need to know what to expect. Patterns run until they break. That is the nature of force. The auto-sabotage loop I just mapped will either erode your life slowly or shatter it suddenly. Both outcomes are painful. Both reveal the same truth. You cannot live a divided inner life forever and expect the outer life to remain unchanged. The break often comes as an accumulation. It is not usually a single dramatic event. It is a series of micro-collapses that together tip you into crisis. Missed rent, a broken appliance, an unreturned invoice, an emergency room visit, a child needing care. Each event is ordinary. Their compound effect is not. The person wakes one morning and recognizes the pattern as an existential threat. I have seen 2 typical endings after the break. One is the downward spiral that hardens identity. The other is the crack that lets light through. Both begin with the same humbling moment. The difference is what you do next. Let me describe the spiral first. In the spiral, shame wins. The person interprets the collapse as personal failure and moral punishment. They double down on the old narrative to make sense of the pain. See, I was right to reject wealth. The narrative provides psychic protection. It avoids responsibility by converting reality into proof of righteousness. This leads to further avoidance. The spiral feeds itself. Relationships fracture. Health declines. Creativity shrinks. Over time, humiliation becomes a steady companion. I have watched marriages erode this way. One partner silently tries to manage money while the other wears poverty as identity. Conversations become battlefields. The partner doing the managing grows resentful and then withdrawn. The identity-anchored partner feels persecuted and clings harder to the moral story. Children learn that spirituality equals shortage. That is generational damage. Now the crack. In this version, the collapse functions as a mirror that cannot be ignored. The humiliation stings, but it is recognized as signal rather than final verdict. The person says, "This story I told myself has caused harm." They stop blaming the world and begin to map the wiring. They take a terrifying, honest look at choices. They do the opposite of the silence that maintained the loop. They open accounts, schedule a meeting with an advisor, learn basic bookkeeping, ask for help. The shift is not dramatic at first. It is a series of small, stubborn acts. The decisive quality in the crack is humility coupled with curiosity. Humility stops the narrative of moral superiority. Curiosity asks instead, how exactly did my choice produce this result? That question is practical and non-shaming. It allows for experimentation. It invites data. It is the mindset I described earlier with the tiny experiments. The crack opens the path to reprogramming. Let me tell you 2 composite stories to make this visceral. Story 1. Maria grew up praised for sacrifice. She married into a similar culture of martyrdom. The break came when her child needed a medical procedure she could not pay for. The emergency was raw enough to bypass the ritual of pride. Maria felt exposed. For the first time, she mapped the loop she had been running. She started with a budget. She learned pricing for her freelance work. She created a small reserve. The first months were clumsy. She felt guilty each time she raised a fee. People in her community whispered. Some criticized. But the practical changes reduced her stress. She stopped making desperate choices. The big surprise, when she allowed competence into her spiritual life, her inner devotion did not crumble. It deepened. Her work scaled. Her family stabilized. Story 2. Jorge believed in signs and waiting. The break came after months of inconsistent income left him with legal notices. Humiliated, He hired an accountant. He hated the language of taxes. He felt like a fraud. Still, he followed the accountant's instructions. He paid penalties, yes. He also learned the discipline of reports. Over time, he was less reactive. He had predictable cash flow. His faith did not die, it matured. Waiting, it turned out, had been a form of avoidance. Participation in practical systems freed mental space for spiritual practice. Both stories share a friction point, social cost. Change invites critique. When you stop performing scarcity, some people will feel betrayed. Expect it. That does not mean you are wrong. It means you are crossing a boundary. Prepare for conversations. Name your priorities. Do the work anyway. What is the first practical action after the break? Something painfully small. You do not overhaul everything on day one. You make one non-avoidant move. Pay one overdue bill. Schedule one meeting. Open one spreadsheet. Call one person you have been avoiding. The specific action is less important than the psychic pattern it interrupts, avoidance. You will also need to create an honesty ritual with yourself. This is not confession to someone else. It is a private inventory. Once a week, list your cash flows. Note the one habitual move you made to avoid discomfort. Name it. Then choose one corrective micro-action for the coming week. Keep it visible. Make it non-negotiable in the same way you keep a spiritual promise. The ritual links accountability with compassion. Now the harder truth. Change of this scale requires boundary work in relationships. If your partner uses your poverty as a badge of virtue, you will need to negotiate new terms. If your community shames competence, you will need to accept some distance. That is painful, but the pain of cutting tangles that sustain dysfunction is often less than the long-term cost of staying entangled. Another practical layer is skill building. Financial competence is boring and necessary. Learn the basics: a budget, an invoice template, a simple pricing model, a reserve with 3 months, a tax calendar. You do not need to become an expert overnight. You need to be literate. Competence reduces anxiety. It changes the quality of your prayer and your decision-making. It does not make you less spiritual. It makes you more reliable. There is a metaphysical point I won't avoid. If you believe in a universe that responds to your inner state, then the shift after the break is not merely pragmatic. It is energetic. When you stop sending mixed messages, I am spiritual, but I am afraid of money, you begin to transmit coherent signals. I am steward. I am worthy. I take responsibility. The universe will meet that coherence where it can through people, through systems, through aligned opportunities. Call it grace. Call it consequence. Either way, the world rearranges to your dominant signal. Finally, expect relapse. Changing a lifelong loop is a process with setbacks. When you relapse, do the inventory, not the self-attack. Map where the conveyor belt found reinforcements. A comment, a memory, a fear. Address that note. Small recorrections compound into new momentum. If you have been running the loop your whole life, this is a long haul. It is also a clarifying one. The break is your teacher. It reveals the machinery you can now name, map, and change. In the next part, 1 will outline the new pattern integration Digna in full. I will give you a daily practice you can adopt that literally retrains the nervous system and the story together. It is not a promise of overnight miracles. It is an invitation to steady, honest repair. If you are ready to stop letting your identity decide your bank balance, that practice is where the work begins. I will be blunt. Reprogramming is not a slogan. It is a set of tiny habits grafted to an honest narrative. If you have been running the loop I described, the work that follows is both psychological and practical. It is nervous system training disguised as spiritual practice. It is the slow refitting of a life that learned to punish itself in the name of virtue. The new pattern I teach is simple in words and stubborn in practice. I call it dignified integration. It is the steady refusal to treat competence as a betrayal of the soul. It is the deliberate pairing of spiritual intention with operational skill. Saying it another way. Dignity demands that we steward resources, because stewardship is itself a spiritual act. That reframe is the hinge. But a hinge is useless without a door to swing. So I give you a ritual and a program. The ritual is short and you must pair it with micro-actions, tiny behaviors that prove the ritual. Choose one micro-action model for the first 30 days. Make it ridiculously small but non-trivial. Examples. When you receive any payment greater than $50, immediately move 30% into a reserve account before you decide what the rest does. Or, for 1 month, quote only one market-appropriate fee to all new clients, even when your inner voice begs you to discount. Or schedule one 20-minute money call each week, a spreadsheet, a bill paid, or a tax question asked. The rule is, the action must be small enough to override the hijack of the nervous system, yet visible enough to create data. Data is the practical spine of reprogramming. At the end of each day, write one line about the financial moment you had. Not a confession, a note. Example. Accepted fee X, felt shame for 30 seconds. Took a 5-minute walk and wrote down the facts. Client was engaged, payment cleared. Over time, this one-line habit builds a ledger of evidence that contradicts the old story. You will begin to collect outcomes, not just feelings. You need also a weekly honesty ritual. Pick one 20 to 30-minute block on the same day each week. Sit with a simple sheet. Income, outflow, one habit you avoided, one small corrective for the next week. Do not moralize. Observe. Record. Close with the unification minute. This weekly discipline creates rhythm. Rhythm defeats chaos. Rhythm teaches you to expect yourself. I want to be precise about micro-boundaries with other people. Reprogramming is not only internal, it alters your social posture. Expect resistance. Some friends or community members will call your choices selling out or losing simplicity. Prepare a short, calm line. I am tending resources so I can serve better. Say it once. Do not debate the posture. The purpose is not to win approval. It is to disengage social feedback loops that pay you emotionally for staying small. You must build a tiny financial literacy scaffold. I am not asking you to become an accountant. Become literate. Have an invoice template. Know 2 numbers, your basic monthly burn and your sustainable minimum fee. Create a labeled reserve account and automate transfers, even if they are $10 a month. Set one calendar reminder for taxes. Literacy is antidotal to shame because it translates vague dread into actionable steps. Action reduces suffering. Now the emotional work. Expect imposter sensations each time you act differently. That feeling is normal, and it will try to convince you that the ritual is hypocritical. Name it in the moment. I'm feeling like an imposter. Say the line out loud. Then act. The naming is essential. It creates distance and allows the executive brain to choose. Let me put this into a concrete 30-day experiment you can run next month. Week 1. Practice the unification minute daily. Choose your micro-action and do it at least once. Week 2. Keep the ritual. Repeat the micro-action 3 times. Start the daily one-line ledger. Week 3. Add the weekly honesty ritual and automate one transfer to reserves. Week 4. Review your ledger and pick one decision you will escalate next month: a higher fee, a conversation, a saved payment. The goal is not perfection. It is a new sequence of small proofs. I want to tell you 2 composite stories so you can feel the ground beneath the practice. The first is Maria. She had performed poverty for decades. She believed suffering conferred moral light. When her child had a surgery, the emergency made the narrative impossible to keep. Maria started with the unification minute because she could do it without telling anyone. The day she invoiced for the first time in 6 months, shame landed like a rainstorm. She named it, moved 30% to a reserve, and then wrote one line: invoice sent. Shame, 40 seconds. She repeated it. 3 months in, an organizer offered her a paid speaking slot at a fair market fee. She almost underpriced it. She did not. She followed the micro-action rule, celebrated with a 5-minute walk, and noted the outcome. The audience stayed, and she received 2 client inquiries. The data accumulated, and the old story, "I must suffer to be holy," lost its evidentiary power. The second is Jorge. He had a lifelong habit of waiting for signs. He paid for courses and never opened them. His habit was paralysis masked as faith. Jorge began the daily ritual and committed to one weekly 20-minute money call where he opened a spreadsheet and answered 3 questions: what came in, what left, and one tiny corrective. The first week he hated it. The third week he noticed less stomach anxiety when he checked his balance. The fourth week he felt justified to ask a client for a to-the-point contract instead of vague promises. That contract arrived. Over months, his waiting posture shifted into participation. Those stories are not heroic. They are ordinary. The change begins not with revelation, but with repetition. The ritual trains your limbic system. The micro-actions build evidence. The ledger rewrites your book of proof. There will be costs. Expect social pushback. Expect old relatives to interpret your competence as betrayal. Expect yourself to lapse. When you lapse, do not escalate shame. Do the weekly ritual. Look at the ledger. Choose one micro-action to do again. Small course corrections matter more than dramatic starts. I need to close this block with something practical you can do in the next 10 minutes. Stand up. Place your hand on your heart. Place the other on your wallet or phone. Breathe in through the nose for 4 counts. Exhale for 6. Say, "Today I will steward what I receive." Then text yourself one concrete micro-action you'll do this week. That tiny movement is the hinge. If you take that hinge, the conversation with reality changes. But knowing this is not the same as seeing how it plays out. In the next section, I will describe the emerging life when this pattern runs for months. I will show what begins to arrive, not as miracle, but as consequence. What looks like grace on the other side is usually the accumulation of small acts. I'll show you what those acts produce and where the tension still lies. You should expect subtlety, not fireworks. But you should also expect proof. And proof will ask you for more than a minute of ritual. It will ask for a life rebuilt in small steps. Keep that question alive. What would your life look like if you kept this up for 6 months? I'll show you scenes of that future next. When patterns change, life rearranges itself in ways that look ordinary at first and enormous later. I want you to imagine 90 days from now. Not fantasy. A plausible follow-through of the rituals and micro-actions you practiced. The changes will be quiet. They will compound. I will describe them as scenes so you can picture how your inner reprogramming becomes an outer reality. Scene 1. A morning that used to begin with dread. You used to open your bank app and feel the tunnel clench. Now, you do the unification minute first. Your pulse is lower. You can see numbers without the old narrative immediately rushing in. You still feel the old whisper, "Don't be greedy," but it arrives as a thought, not as a verdict. You name it and move on. The practical result: when you call a client, you are less likely to apologize for your fee. Conversations are clearer. You charge what you need. The psychological dividend is peace, and the pragmatic dividend is stability. Scene 2. An invitation to teach. The old self would have halved the fee to avoid appearing mercenary. Now you pause. You consult the ledger. You follow your micro-action rule. You state one non-negotiable fee in a calm voice. People accept it. You still feel uneasy. You do the 5-minute celebration ritual after the call. That ritual trains your limbic system to associate dignity with reward, not spending. The class arrives with engaged attendees. You notice fewer people who expected freebies. The work has different energy. Your accounts show it. Scene 3. A surprise payment arrives. Old rules would have led you to spend it to soothe guilt or to donate it immediately to prove goodness. Now you follow the pre-commitment. Move 30% to reserve. Allocate another 20% to a purposeful reinvestment and decide calmly about the rest. That allocation reduces future panic when something breaks. You are less reactive. The world presents fewer emergencies because you built room for them. These are small scenes, but they rewrite your biography over time. Small proof changes the narrative you tell yourself. Proof accumulates faster than rhetoric. After 3 to 6 months, the returns start to compound into external shifts. A client who pays on time becomes a retainer. A workshop becomes a recurring contract. A reserve absorbs a broken appliance without panic. These changes feel modest in isolation and radical in some. You should also expect friction. The old pattern fights back. Old stories surface precisely when something good happens. A fee paid on time can trigger old guilt. Did I take advantage? And the reflex may be to give a discount retroactively. Do not do that. Use the pause. Name the thought. Look at your ledger evidence. Ask, what does the evidence say? Most times it will point to stability, not exploitation. Now, let me give you 2 comparative portraits to sharpen the image of the future. Portrait A. The person who continues the ritual and micro-actions. They are not perfect. They relapse. They course correct. Over 12 months, their basic monthly stress about money drops significantly. They have a small reserve. They can negotiate calmly. They make fewer desperate choices. Spiritually, they report deeper practice, not less. The paradox here is consistent. When you stop pretending that poverty equals purity, your inner life often deepens. Why? Because competence creates space for real devotion, not performative suffering. Portrait B. The person who tries the ritual for a week and then stops. The old loop reasserts. The social applause for martyrdom returns. Their stories about money resume. Nothing structural changes. Months later they report they tried, but life didn't shift. It didn't because a ritual for a week becomes mere sentiment, not training. The system requires repetition. I want to address an objection I hear often. If I earn more or protect my money, will I lose my spirituality? That question hides a moralized fear, the belief that money will alter your soul. My observation is the opposite. Money is an amplifier. It amplifies what you already are. If you are compassionate and literate, more resources scale your capacity to care. If you are reactive and unskilled, more resources magnify the chaos. The work is about changing the inner architecture, not the outer color. Practically, your calendar will change. You will replace vague waiting with scheduled participation, learning about simple bookkeeping, an annual tax date circled, a monthly review. Those small commitments create a different relationship with authority and with reality. You will develop modest competence, and competence is contagious to your community. There is also a less discussed benefit: agency in boundary conversations. When money is not an identity, you can ask for what you need without drama. You can say no to requests that drain you and yes to ones that align. That clarity ends cycles of resentment and passive sacrifice. It is one of the quietest spiritual acts I teach. I must warn you about the fragility of the early wins. The new pattern is not bulletproof. Certain triggers will be potent family scripts, a moralistic partner, an old curse of shame. Those triggers can collapse the new behavior if you rely only on willpower. That is why I insist on the ritual plus micro-action plus ledger architecture. Ritual calms nervous reactivity. Micro-actions create tolerable steps. The ledger gives you evidence for negotiation with old stories. Now imagine a year of this practice. The picture becomes steadier. You have a 3-month reserve. You have a named fee structure. You rarely apologize for being paid. You have fewer emergency calls. Your daily practice is not flashy. It is a series of consistent choices. You choose reserves. You choose clarity. You choose boundaries. Month after month, those choices compound into a different life. So what does grace look like in this context? It looks like options. It looks like being able to say yes to an opportunity because it aligns, not because you need it to survive. It looks like being able to be generous from abundance rather than panic. It looks like a kind of humility that is not self-abuse. Before I close this part, let me give you a short diagnostic to test where you stand. Ask yourself 3 simple questions aloud. When I am offered money, what is my first bodily response, tightening or opening? Do I have one number I can state without shame? My basic monthly burn. When something unexpected arrives, do I move automatically or do I consult a simple rule? If you answered tighten, no, and automatically, the future I described is urgent for you. If you answered open, yes, and consult rule, you are already on the path. The next section will do 2 things. First, it will pull the threads together and give you a compact closing diagnosis. Second, it will hand you the smallest possible next step you can take in the next 5 minutes. That next step will be the hinge between knowing and doing. If you are still listening, be ready to act. We began with a contradiction. People who claim spiritual elevation while obsessively living in shortage. You have seen the mechanism now. You have seen how the loop operates, how it trains the nervous system, how it signals the world. You have seen a new pattern and the rituals that begin to rewire the story. The question left is practical. Where do you begin, and how do you stay in the work when everything in you resists? First, the diagnosis in a few sentences. You operate a reliable internal script that equates scarcity with virtue. That script deploys an effective alarm whenever resource opportunity appears. The alarm triggers avoidance or performative generosity. The outcome is evidence for the script. The solution is not logic only. It is a new embodied repetition that pairs dignity with competence. That is the short thesis. It is not comfortable. It is real. Second, a mirror question. I want you to answer it honestly. Which of these best describes you right now? You are denying the problem. You are stuck deep in the loop. You are beginning the ritual but inconsistent, or you are actively reprogramming. Notice which answer surfaces. That awareness itself is an act of responsibility. If your reflex is to minimize or to get offended, stop. Take the unification minute now. Name what you feel. Third, a micro step you can take in the next 5 minutes. Do this exactly. Open your phone. Place a 1-line note in a place you will see daily titled Stewardship. Write 1 concrete micro action you will do this week. Make it specific. When paid anything greater than $100, move 30% to reserve. Or quote my market fee without apologizing for 1 month. Or schedule a 20-minute money call this Friday. Save the note. Close your eyes. Do the unification minute. That single action, repeated, alters trajectories. Now, a pragmatic list of what to expect as you continue. Expect shame and old voices. They will surface more loudly when you do better financially. They will tell stories of corruption or betrayal. Counter them with evidence. Keep the ledger. When the old voice says, "This is wrong," your ledger will say, "You raised a fee, the client stayed." Expect social cost. Some communities value scarcity as morality. You will be seen as disloyal. You will lose some applause. You will gain clarity. That trade-off is necessary. You cannot keep a pattern that injures you to maintain social praise. Expect relapse. It happens. When you relapse, do not dramatize. Use the weekly ritual to scan what happened. Name the trigger. Choose 1 corrective micro-action for the coming week. Repeat. I will offer 3 short practices you can rotate permanently. Practice 1, the pause rule. When a financial choice appears, pause for 60 seconds. Breathe. Name the first narrative that arises. Ask, is this a moral story or a practical question? If it is moral storytelling, file it. Answer the practical question. Short pauses give your prefrontal cortex a chance to act. Practice 2, the reserve move. Every time you receive an unplanned inflow greater than a threshold you set, move a fixed percentage to a reserve within 24 hours. Automation helps. This simple act reduces panic and trains your nervous system to expect buffers. Practice 3, the 1-question ledger. At the end of each day, ask only 1 question and answer it in 1 line. What did I do today that honored both my spirit and my stewardship? Keep the answer short. This question frames action, not repentance. I want to return to something I said earlier. Dignity is not pretense. It is not spending for status. It is the refusal to use scarcity as a moral cloak. When you choose competence, you do not abandon values. You reclaim them. Stewardship is devotion. Paying taxes, that gratitude led to more stable giving in ways that were sustainable, not heroic and brittle. If you have stayed with me, then this is your moment to decide on a small, non-negotiable act. Decide it now. The smallest act is better than the largest intention. Choose the micro-action you will repeat weekly. Write it down where you will see it. Do the unification minute. Do the rest tomorrow. I will leave you with 3 final sentences you can repeat when the old story pings. My spirit and my stewardship belong to the same life in me. I will act with care. I will learn as I go. Thank you for staying with this uncomfortable honesty. If you are willing to do the small work, the world will respond with small proofs. Keep a ledger. Keep your ritual. Keep your boundaries. That accumulation is where the real shift lies. If you want the single next reading, pick one insolvency in your life, a late bill, an overdue invoice, a missed tax filing, and apply one micro-action to it this week. Name the feeling, take the step, record the outcome. That is how you move from story to evidence. Do that, and you will have begun the work that maps the next decade of your life.